Right, so it should be day 170 of my attempt to plant a tree every day for 2023, but I missed a couple of weeks, so we're going to be planting for day 165 and 166, so we're nearly caught up now. So part 1, so for day 165, is a sort of complementary planting, because on Easter Sunday I planted a Carpentaria. Now this is very much a forest palm. It's a northern Australian palm which really does want a canopy above it, or an awful lot of water if it doesn't have that. And this doesn't so much have a canopy above it. It does have a very thin canopy of sicklebush directly above it, but currently the sun is not coming from directly above, it's coming from quite a steep angle, and so that means that sicklebush is not really providing the shade that we would want. So I'm going to be planting a little plant due north of this to try and just soften a little bit of that midday sun and early afternoon sun. And as this grows up, it should help shade the base of this. Also, every time I water, that water going into this new tree will be spreading into the soil and hopefully contributing to the moisture around the base of our little Carpentaria. It's a sort of water saving scheme where multiple trees will be watered at once. So the tree is not the Dracaena reflexa that's going in first as a marker, it is this little Pachira seedling that has popped up along one of the drip lines. So this is a lovely little Saba nut. This is a type of South American edible nut. It's in the Bombaceae, which I think has now been sunk into the Malvaceae, so it's sort of related to the hibiscuses, the baobabs, that sort of group of plants. And also I think the star chestnuts have also been sunk into that family, so that general group of plants. But it's a lovely little tree. It's a swamp plant by nature, but it's very, very hardy once established and can tolerate absolutely no extra irrigation, even in our very seasonal part of Africa. In with that, we're also going to be putting a nice little piece of aloe arborescens, which is the Krantz aloe. This is a southern African one, which is quite good at forming thickets. In full sun, they'll form quite a high thicket and sometimes almost become tree-like, hence arborescens, arborescent aloe. But they are not one of the true tree aloes because they rarely get to sort of tree-like proportions. They tend to more flop and scramble, and particularly in shade, they tend to come up to about 2 or 3 feet above the ground, and then flop over and then branch a lot, and you get this wonderful tangle, which is very dense and very sort of appealing habitat for a lot of wildlife, but it's also a very good sort of fireproof ground cover. We're also going to be putting another succulent ground cover in with that, which is also southern African mostly, but it does narrowly extend into the far south of Zambia. I do find this wants a little bit more irrigation than I would expect given its natural range, but it can survive year-round with no irrigation. It just tends to get very, very weak if you do that, and you're sort of odds on it surviving a low. But in the rains, it really sort of bushes out and spreads out a lot, and it roots really wherever it touches the ground. So this is actually rooted in the lawn, well, in what passes for a lawn once you have chickens, and so it is very inclined to root just about anywhere a little piece lands, but it should spread out nicely and form a nice little ground cover here. Again, it's somewhat succulent, it's quite aromatic, so it can be a disruptor to pests. It's not as toxic as something like calico, but it should be a nice way of keeping the ground cool, keeping the water in the ground that way. For day 166, I'm being a little bit vindictive, and I'm also having probably the fastest turnaround on planting a tree, that tree being killed, and planting something else there. So this is where I planted a Eugenia uniflora, actually since I came back from travelling, so very recently, and the molerats have come up underneath, dug up this area, not the surrounding area, just the planting spot, without apparently eating anything, but they have torn right through the root of this little Suriname cherry, the Eugenia. So I'm going to be replacing that with something they will really think twice about tearing through the roots of, which is Euphorbia tirucalli. This is not as suitable for this site because this is a somewhat shaded site. This is a shade-tolerant Euphorbia, but it's really going to get rather leggy and sprawling in as much shade as it's going to get here, and it's going to need to be controlled because it's quite close to some other small trees, which would have interacted very well with the Eugenia and won't interact so well with the Euphorbia, but given that I know the molerats clearly like this area, the Eugenia suddenly becomes less good of a choice, and so finding a tree that will do well in this area, albeit with a lot of pruning to keep it sort of compatible with the other trees around, the Euphorbia seems ideal. Right, so that should be everything for tonight. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you have enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it, please tune in again tomorrow because I will be planting something else. I don't know what yet, we can find out together.